In the story of Joseph, we witness a journey that begins with betrayal and ends with redemption, a tale that takes us from the depths of a pit to the heights of Egyptian power. Joseph's life is one of profound transformation, marked by moments of pain, perseverance, forgiveness, and faith. As we follow his path from being a favored son, sold into slavery by his own brothers, to becoming the governor of Egypt, we see how even the darkest circumstances can be used for good. This story is a testament to the incredible power of trusting in a higher purpose and the strength that comes from embracing God's plan, even when it seems impossible to understand. Joseph's journey is not just a historical account. It is a timeless reminder of the importance of forgiveness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering love of God. In the shadowy halls of ancient Egyptian palaces, where the power of Pharaoh was unquestionable and destiny was crafted by the whim of a ruler, there existed a practice so dark that it left an indelible mark on those who endured it: the brutal act of castration. Men of potential, whether captured or chosen, were subjected to this violence, leaving them physically and emotionally scarred, forever stripped of the chance to build a dynasty or leave a legacy. In the midst of this harrowing practice, the story of Potiphar, a prominent Egyptian official, and Joseph, a young Hebrew slave, unfolds. Potiphar was no ordinary man. He was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, a high-ranking official who commanded significant authority in the Egyptian court. The book of Genesis describes Potiphar as a man of great power, trusted not only with Pharaoh's personal security, but also with the custody of state prisoners and those considered threats to the throne. His residence was more than a home. It was a symbol of status, a center of influence, adorned with the finest Egyptian artifacts. Under the management of Joseph, Potiphar's house was described as thriving and prosperous, reflecting the trust Potiphar had in his steward. But Potiphar's identity is shrouded in ambiguity. Some biblical translations refer to him as a eunuch, a term that traditionally implies castration, particularly in Eastern cultures, where such individuals were often chosen for positions of trust within the royal court. Their inability to have families made them more loyal, less likely to threaten royal power with ambitions of their own lineage. However, this label has led to confusion and speculation. Did Potiphar undergo castration, or was the term used merely to denote his official status? The biblical text provides no explicit evidence of his physical condition, leaving scholars divided. What is clear, however, is that Potiphar was a man of immense influence, whose role in Joseph's life would prove to be pivotal. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob and the firstborn of his beloved wife Rachel, had always been a figure of intrigue. From a young age, he was his father's favorite, a fact made evident by the richly ornamented coat Jacob gifted him, a symbol of special love and a mark of distinction within the family. This overt favoritism bred jealousy among his brothers, who were further incensed by Joseph's prophetic dreams. In one dream, Joseph saw his brothers, sheaves of wheat bowing down to his, and in another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. These dreams suggested a future where Joseph would hold authority over his family, a prospect his brothers found intolerable. One day, while tending their flocks far from home, the brothers saw Joseph approaching and seized the opportunity to rid themselves of him. Initially planning to kill him, they were dissuaded by Reuben, the eldest brother, who suggested they throw Joseph into an empty cistern instead, intending to rescue him later. But while Reuben was away, the other brothers decided to sell Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants headed for Egypt. For 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was sold, and his fate was sealed. To cover up their crime, the brothers dipped Joseph's beautiful coat in goat's blood and presented it to their father Jacob, who concluded that his beloved son had been killed by a wild beast. Jacob's grief was profound, and no one could console him. Meanwhile, Joseph's journey took him to Egypt, a land of great wealth and power, where he was bought by Potiphar. From the moment Joseph entered Potiphar's house, it was evident that the Lord was with him. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper, and Potiphar soon recognized his exceptional abilities. Trusting Joseph completely, Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. Joseph managed all of Potiphar's affairs, overseeing everything from the servants to the financial resources. The only thing Potiphar withheld from Joseph was his wife. Potiphar's wife, however, was captivated by Joseph. Impressed by his good looks and integrity, she repeatedly attempted to seduce him. Day after day, she tried to lure Joseph into betraying his master's trust, but Joseph stood firm, refusing her advances. He knew that to succumb would be not only a betrayal of Potiphar but also a sin against God. His steadfast refusal only fueled her desire, and her persistence grew more desperate. One day when the house was empty, Potiphar's wife seized the opportunity, grabbing Joseph and demanding he lie with her. In a desperate bid to escape, Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in her hands. Humiliated by his rejection, Potiphar's wife sought revenge. She screamed for help, claiming that Joseph had tried to assault her, and used his cloak as evidence to support her false accusation. When Potiphar returned and heard his wife's story, he was furious. Yet notably, he did not sentence Joseph to death, a common punishment for such an accusation against a slave. Instead, Joseph was sent to the royal prison where Pharaoh's prisoners were held. This decision suggests that Potiphar may have had some doubts about his wife's account, or perhaps he had come to know Joseph's character well enough to suspect the truth. Even in the dark confines of the prison, Joseph's fortunes did not fade. The Bible tells us that the Lord was still with him, and Joseph soon gained the favor of the chief jailer. With his administrative skills and integrity, Joseph was put in charge of the other prisoners and the daily operations of the prison. Once again, everything under Joseph's management flourished, even in the grim conditions of captivity. During his time in prison, Joseph encountered two of Pharaoh's officials who had been incarcerated, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both men had troubling dreams on the same night and were distressed by their inability to understand them. Joseph, seeing their distress, offered to interpret their dreams, emphasizing that interpretations belonged to God. The cupbearer was the first to share his dream, which involved a vine with 3 branches that blossomed and bore grapes. Joseph interpreted the dream, explaining that within 3 days, the cupbearer would be restored to his former position. Encouraged by this favorable interpretation, the chief baker shared his dream, which involved 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating from the top basket. Unfortunately, Joseph had a grim interpretation for the baker. Within 3 days, he would be hanged, and birds would eat his flesh. 3 days later, events unfolded exactly as Joseph had predicted. The cupbearer was reinstated to his position while the baker was executed. Despite Joseph's request that the cupbearer remember him and mention his plight to Pharaoh, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison for another 2 years. It wasn't until Pharaoh himself had 2 troubling dreams that the cupbearer remembered the young Hebrew who had accurately interpreted his dream. Pharaoh's dreams were of great significance. In one, he saw 7 healthy cows being devoured by 7 gaunt cows, and in the other, 7 full ears of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, withered ears. None of Pharaoh's advisors could interpret these dreams, and it was then that the cupbearer spoke of Joseph. Joseph was quickly brought from the dungeon, and when asked about the dreams, he humbly stated that the interpretation would come from God. Joseph explained that Egypt would experience 7 years of great abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine. He didn't stop there. He also proposed a strategy to prepare for the impending crisis. Pharaoh should appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the collection of food during the years of plenty, ensuring there would be sufficient provisions during the years of scarcity. Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and discernment and decided there was no one better suited for the task than Joseph himself. Thus, Joseph was appointed governor of Egypt, second in power only to Pharaoh. He was given the Egyptian name Zaphanath-Paneah and was married to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. This marriage further solidified Joseph's position in Egyptian society, integrating him into the country's social and religious elite. As governor, Joseph oversaw the collection of grain during the 7 years of abundance, filling storehouses throughout Egypt. When the years of famine came, the whole region was affected, but Egypt was well prepared, thanks to Joseph's foresight. People from surrounding nations came to Egypt to buy grain, including Joseph's own brothers, who were driven by the famine in Canaan. When they arrived, they did not recognize Joseph, now a powerful Egyptian official. But Joseph recognized them. Rather than revealing himself immediately, he decided to test his brothers to see if they had changed since the day they sold him into slavery. Joseph accused them of being spies and demanded that they bring their youngest brother Benjamin as proof of their honesty. He kept Simeon as a hostage while they returned to Canaan. After some hesitation, Jacob allowed Benjamin to go back to Egypt with his brothers. When they returned, Joseph hosted a banquet for them, but still kept his identity hidden. He then devised one final test. He secretly placed a silver cup in Benjamin's sack of grain and accused them of theft, threatening to keep Benjamin as a slave. It was then that Judah, the same brother who had suggested selling Joseph years earlier, stepped forward and pleaded with Joseph to take him as a slave instead of Benjamin, so as not to cause their father further grief. Moved by Judah's selflessness and the evident change in his brothers, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He revealed his true identity, weeping openly and embracing his brothers. He forgave them, explaining that although they had intended harm, God had used their actions for good to save many lives. Joseph then invited his brothers to return to Canaan and bring their father and their entire family to live in Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. When Jacob learned that Joseph was still alive, he was overwhelmed with joy. The family moved to Egypt, where they were warmly received by Joseph and Pharaoh. They settled in the land of Goshen, one of the best regions in Egypt, where they prospered and grew in number. Life in Goshen was marked by prosperity and peace for Jacob's family. The fertile land allowed them to thrive, and they experienced a sense of security that had long been absent. Joseph's brothers, once consumed by jealousy and rivalry, now worked side by side, their relationships transformed by the trials they had endured. Jacob, now an old man, could finally rest knowing that his family was reunited and safe. The joy of being with Joseph, whom he had thought lost forever, brought Jacob great comfort in his final years. As the famine continued, Joseph's role as governor became even more crucial. He managed the distribution of grain, not only to the Egyptians, but also to those from other lands who came seeking relief. His wisdom and careful planning ensured that Egypt remained a beacon of hope in a time of widespread despair. The respect Joseph commanded was evident in the way people from all walks of life came to him, relying on his judgment and integrity. His leadership not only saved countless lives but also strengthened Egypt's position as a powerful and benevolent nation. During this time, Joseph had 2 sons with Asenath. He named the first Manasseh, meaning, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house," symbolizing his journey of healing from the pain of his past. His second son was named Ephraim, meaning, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering," reflecting the blessings he had received despite the hardships he had faced. These names were a testament to Joseph's faith and his recognition of God's hand in every aspect of his life, from the depths of the cistern to the heights of power in Egypt. As the years of famine drew on, Jacob's health began to decline. Knowing that his time was near, Jacob called for his sons to gather around him. He spoke blessings over each of them, sharing his hopes and prophecies for their futures. To Joseph he gave a special blessing, acknowledging the trials his beloved son had endured and the strength he had shown. Jacob also requested to be buried in Canaan, in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah were buried. It was a poignant reminder of the family's heritage and the promises God had made to them. After the passing of Jacob, Joseph faced yet another test of his compassion and leadership, but this time it came from within his own family. His brothers, now fearful that their father's death might free Joseph from any lingering restraint, were consumed with anxiety. They worried that Joseph might finally take revenge for the cruelty they had inflicted upon him many years before. Desperate to protect themselves, they devised a plan to seek Joseph's mercy. They approached him with humility, sending a message that claimed Jacob, before his death, had left a plea for Joseph to forgive his brothers for their transgressions. Though their words were crafted out of fear, they carried an echo of genuine remorse. Upon hearing this, Joseph was moved to tears. He understood the fear that gripped his brothers and perhaps even the shame they still bore for their actions. The journey that had taken him from a vulnerable young boy to the governor of Egypt had taught him many things, but above all, it had taught him the power of forgiveness. Joseph called his brothers to him and spoke words that would forever resonate as a profound expression of grace. "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." In that moment, Joseph not only forgave his brothers, but he also sought to ease their fears, reassuring them that he would continue to care for them and their families. Joseph's response to his brothers' fears demonstrated his deep understanding of God's sovereignty. He did not see himself as an instrument of vengeance. Rather, he saw himself as part of a divine plan that transcended the pain of his past. His perspective had shifted from personal hurt to a broader view of purpose, one that embraced the hand of God in every aspect of his journey. This understanding allowed Joseph to fully release any resentment and replace it with compassion. The very brothers who had sold him into slavery were now under his protection, and he embraced them with a love that reflected the grace he had received from God. In the years that followed, Joseph continued to be a pillar of strength for his family. The land of Goshen became a place where the Israelites flourished under Joseph's watchful care. They grew in numbers, wealth, and influence, and for a time they lived in peace. The Egyptians, too, continued to hold Joseph in high regard, recognizing the prosperity and stability he had brought to their nation during a time of crisis. His policies during the years of abundance and famine had not only saved Egypt, but also transformed it into a center of power and resourcefulness in the region. As Joseph aged, his thoughts turned increasingly to the promises that God had made to his forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Though he had risen to a position of immense power in Egypt, Joseph never forgot his true heritage. He knew that Egypt was not the final destination for his people. It was a place of refuge, yes, but the promise of God was a land that flowed with milk and honey, a land that would belong to his descendants. As he neared the end of his life, Joseph gathered his family and made them swear an oath. "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." This was not merely a request for burial, it was a statement of faith. Joseph believed in the fulfillment of God's promises, even if he would not live to see them. Joseph's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy endured. He had lived a life defined by faith, resilience, and an unwavering trust in God. His journey from the favored son to a slave, from a prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt, was a testament to the mysterious way in which God works. Joseph's ability to forgive, to lead, and to trust in a greater plan left an indelible mark not only on his family, but also on the history of the Israelites. His story became a source of hope for future generations, especially during times of hardship and uncertainty. Many years after Joseph's death, the Israelite situation in Egypt began to change. A new pharaoh, who did not know of Joseph or his contributions, came into power. He viewed the growing numbers of Israelites as a threat and subjected them to harsh labor, enslaving them in an effort to curb their influence. The land that had once been a place of refuge under Joseph's governance now became a place of oppression. The Israelites cried out under the weight of their bondage, and it seemed as though the legacy of Joseph had been forgotten. Yet the faith that Joseph had instilled in his people endured. They held on to the hope of deliverance, remembering the promise that God had made, a promise that had been passed down through the generations, kept alive by the memory of Joseph's faith. The story of Joseph, in many ways, foreshadows the greater story of redemption that would unfold in the history of the Israelites. Just as Joseph had been betrayed, suffered, and ultimately rose to a position where he could save many, the people of Israel would experience suffering in Egypt, only to be delivered by God's mighty hand. Joseph's bones, carried out of Egypt during the Exodus, would serve as a tangible reminder of God's faithfulness. A symbol that God fulfills his promises, no matter how much time has passed or how impossible the circumstances may seem. Joseph's ability to see beyond his own suffering and to understand the role he played in God's greater plan is perhaps one of the most powerful lessons his story offers. It speaks to the importance of perspective, of being able to look at the challenges we face and see them as part of a much larger picture. Joseph's life was filled with moments that could have led to despair. Being betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Yet, at every turn, Joseph chose to trust in God. He chose to believe that his life had purpose, even when that purpose was not immediately clear. This perspective did not come without struggle. The Bible does not dwell on Joseph's inner turmoil, but it is not difficult to imagine the moments of doubt and loneliness he must have faced. The years spent in prison, the uncertainty of his fate, and the weight of betrayal could have easily crushed his spirit. However, Joseph's faith allowed him to endure, and his endurance became a testimony to those around him. His integrity and his unwavering belief in God's goodness were evident in everything he did, from managing Potiphar's household to overseeing the prison and ultimately governing Egypt. His life was a living testament to the power of faithfulness and the impact of trusting in God's plan. In the context of his family, Joseph's story also serves as a powerful narrative of reconciliation. The brokenness that had defined his relationship with his brothers was healed not through retribution, but through forgiveness. Joseph had every right to be angry, to seek revenge, or to use his power to make his brothers suffer as he had suffered. Instead, he chose to forgive. This forgiveness was not a passive act. It was a deliberate choice to break the cycle of hatred and to replace it with love and compassion. By doing so, Joseph not only restored his relationship with his brothers, but also set an example for future generations of what true forgiveness looks like. The transformation of Joseph's brothers is another significant aspect of the story. When they first sold Joseph into slavery, they were driven by jealousy and hatred. Years later, when they stood before Joseph in Egypt, they were different men, humbled by the famine, by the loss of their brother, and by the weight of their own guilt. Judah's willingness to offer himself in place of Benjamin was a powerful sign of this change. It was an act of selflessness that mirrored the love Joseph had shown them. This change in the brothers, coupled with Joseph's willingness to forgive, allowed the family to be reunited and for healing to take place. The story of Joseph and his brothers is a reminder that people are capable of change. It shows that even the most broken relationships can be restored when there is a willingness to forgive and a desire to make things right. It also highlights the importance of humility, of recognizing one's mistakes and seeking forgiveness. The brothers' journey from jealousy and betrayal to repentance and reconciliation is a powerful testament to the transformative power of grace. Joseph's impact extended far beyond his own family. His leadership during the years of famine not only saved countless lives, but also established a legacy of wisdom and compassion that would be remembered for generations. His ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams and to act on that knowledge demonstrated a profound connection with God, a recognition that his gifts were not his own, but were given to him for a purpose. Joseph's story reminds us that our talents and abilities are meant to be used for the greater good, to serve others, and to fulfill the roles that God has set before us. As we reflect on Joseph's story, we are reminded of the importance of trusting in God's timing. There were many moments in Joseph's life when it must have seemed as though God had forgotten him, when he was sitting in a prison cell, abandoned and alone, or when he was carried off to a foreign land as a slave. Yet in every moment, God was at work, orchestrating events in a way that would ultimately lead to Joseph's rise to power and the salvation of many. It is a reminder that God's plans often unfold in ways that we cannot understand, and that our role is to remain faithful, even when the path ahead is unclear. The story of Joseph also speaks to the idea of legacy. Joseph's legacy was not one of wealth or power, though he had both. Instead, his legacy was one of faith, forgiveness, and a deep understanding of God's sovereignty. He left behind a family that was stronger and more united because of his willingness to forgive and to love without condition. He left behind a nation that had been saved from starvation because of his wisdom and foresight. Joseph's influence continued to echo through the centuries, shaping the identity of the Israelites long after his death. When Moses eventually led the Israelites out of Egypt, Joseph's bones were carried with them, a symbol of the hope that had never died. Joseph had prophesied that God would surely come to their aid, and even in death, his belief in that promise inspired his people. His life was a testament to the enduring power of faith, a faith that could transcend generations and sustain an entire nation through trials and tribulations. Joseph's story is also a story about God's providence. Throughout every twist and turn, every betrayal and triumph, God's hand was at work. The very events that seemed like setbacks, his brother's betrayal, his enslavement, his imprisonment, were all integral parts of God's plan to elevate Joseph to a position where he could save not only his family, but countless others. It is a reminder that what may seem like insurmountable obstacles or unwarranted suffering may actually be part of a larger purpose, a divine plan that we cannot yet see. In times of darkness, Joseph's story offers a beacon of light. It shows us that no matter how dire our circumstances may appear, there is always hope. God's plans for us are often beyond our understanding, but they are always for good. The hardships that Joseph endured were the very means by which he was prepared for the incredible responsibilities that lay ahead. His story encourages us to trust in God's process, to remain faithful even when the path is uncertain, and to believe that he can bring beauty out of our deepest pain. Ultimately, Joseph's story is a story of redemption, not just for Joseph, but for his entire family. It is a story that underscores the importance of grace, the power of transformation, and the belief that no one is beyond redemption. Joseph's willingness to forgive his brothers and to welcome them back into his life reflects the grace that God extends to all of us. It is a powerful reminder that even when we fall short, even when we make mistakes, there is always an opportunity for reconciliation and a chance to start anew. In the end, Joseph's life was a testament to the enduring promise of God's love and faithfulness. He lived a life marked by incredible highs and devastating lows, yet through it all, he remained steadfast in his faith. His journey from the pit to the palace is a testament to the transformative power of trusting in God's plan. His ability to forgive, to lead with integrity, and to love without condition serves as an enduring inspiration for all who face trials and hardships. Joseph's legacy is one of hope, a hope that endures, that uplifts, and that points us back to the God who is always at work, even in the most challenging circumstances. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the lessons you've drawn from Joseph's story. How has this narrative of faith and redemption spoken to you? Feel free to share your reflections and insights in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through Joseph's incredible life, please subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell to receive updates on our upcoming video episodes. Thank you for joining us, and may you be blessed with the enduring hope and faith that Joseph's story embodies.